when power is accumulated and citizens, the people are getting poorer, angry, there's normally a revolution. If the king has to fall down.
Yes.
Do you see a revolution coming? From you and me, normal people who are not in the big data companies, states, wars, because it's getting critical.
Yes. Well, the discontent is definitely growing. I think a lot of that discontent has been misplaced in the last decade in that it has targeted disproportionately industries other than the technology one. So a lot of people fixated on finance, some people fixated on big oil. By and large, technology industry, because it draws on this huge countercultural legacy of California in the 1970s and 60s, it managed to present itself as essentially being on the side of the emancipated, postmodern subject that breaks away with all of the oppressive networks and all the oppressive structures in which we have all been inserted either by bureaucracy or by family and so forth. I think this is beginning to change, and that people are beginning to look at Silicon Valley not just as a bunch of benevolent entrepreneurs, but as what is now increasingly called big tech. Right? I always wondered why the term big data is only used to refer to collections of databases and is not used in the way we use terms like big pharma or big oil. Because clearly you have an organized industry with a set of agendas that they're trying to promote at the level of policymaking, but we don't treat them as an industry. We treat them as actually mostly benevolent players that are offering us free services. I think that is beginning to change. But also we should not overestimate the ability of people to organize outside of their own platforms. I mean, unfortunately, a revolution now takes place on Twitter and Facebook. This is how they at least get intermediated, which is not particularly the best way forward if your enemies are Twitter and Facebook. But also you should not underestimate the ability of the modern kind of policing apparatus, particularly as we shift to a model like the smart city, to be able to predict and preempt dissent.
Okay, so you don't see a revolution coming because it's difficult to organize between each other outside of the platforms where we interact.
That's not true. I see the possibility of the revolution. I'm just saying it's going to be very hard. It will require infrastructures that will be very different. It will require targeting the enemy correctly, and you have to know who it is that you're fighting in any revolution. You can't just be fighting the system. When you fight the system, you fight nobody. And it will require actually properly defining what the kind of main frontier of value production that you need to reclaim would be. Communists always thought they need to grab the means of production, right? But at this point, you wouldn't know what to grab because you don't really know, you don't really have a good understanding of how value is produced in the system. Should you be grabbing data? But fine, how do you grab data? It's not like a plant. You cannot go and grab the telegraph the way Lenin wanted to go and grab the telegraph, right? So I mean, it's a much trickier set of questions. So what would prospective revolutionaries be doing? But nonetheless, I think the Silicon Valley itself has sensed that there is discontent brewing in the system. That's why they're doing their best to experiment with all sorts of kind of crazy ideas that you'd normally expect the business sector to take on, from basic income to tax on robots to building completely privatized cities where all of the services will be offered by technology firms. There is a lot up for grabs. So we are living through a moment not unlike the structural transformation we saw in America in the 1930s, where you had the New Deal emerge and kind of set the tone for the next 40, 50 years. So I think we are living through the beginning of that period where the kind of economic and political model we'll converge upon in 2020, it might in fact define how the world would function, and it will be the kind of change that previously we associated with big transformations, like the emergence of the welfare state, the emergence of the Fordist kind of production system, and its effect on welfare cities and so forth. I think we are at that point. Right? And clearly all those concessions, including the New Deal, were done and given precisely to avoid the revolution. Right? So at this point, I think Silicon Valley understands that a new set of concessions have to be granted. Otherwise, something else will happen.